Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be starting a brand new series, What is Theocracy? Now, simply defined, a theocracy is a country that is ruled by religion. However, there are many variations of what that can mean in practice and varying philosophical justifications for theocracy, which differ from country to country and religion to religion. Theocracies are often forms of communitarian nationalism. So check out our series on types of nationalism if you're curious about that. In this video, we're going to focus on the different degrees of theocracy that have been proposed by theologians and philosophers. And in the following videos in this mini-series, we're going to cover varying types of theocracy or theocracy-adjacent positions, including Islamism, Zionism, Hindutva, and Christian nationalism. Now, before you jump down my throat and jump into the comments saying that this position Zionism isn't actually a theocracy, Hindutva isn't actually a theocracy, wait for those videos. We're going to talk about the nuanced ways in which they might be theocracy adjacent, in which they might have some components of theocracy and some components just of communitarian nationalism. There will be information coming, so don't jump into my comments yet, at least until you've watched the rest of this video. Now, theocracy can come in a range of degrees. On one end of the spectrum, it can mean that the religious organization simply is the state, while on the other end, it can mean that religious principles are guiding or influencing laws, politicians, and judges. In this video, we're going to cover several such degrees of theocracy, starting with the most extreme and working our way down. So, the most extreme type of theocracy imagines one government throughout the whole world ruled over by the single leader of the one religion, where everyone in the world is forced to follow that religion, and the laws and rules are made on the basis of that religious leader's decrees. Such a system has never existed globally, but there are countries, such as Vatican City, where the political ruler and the head of the religious organization are one and the same. The Italian philosopher Tommaso Campenella proposed such a view, arguing for the Pope as the supreme monarch of the world. Campenella argued that Christianity was a natural state for people, and a utopia would emerge because people would willingly follow laws that they believed were passed down from God, and the content of such laws was clear and natural for everyone to accept. This idea of direct political control by the clergy is echoed in some versions of Shia Islam, particularly the concept of vilayat-i-faqih, or mandate of the jurist, that claims that the ruler of the state should be a member of the clergy. This viewpoint, often attributed to Ahmad al-Naraqi, makes the case that during the occultation of the holy Imam Wali al-Asir, that leadership should fall to a supreme leader who holds this authority until the divinely inspired Imam returns. Arguably, this is the system that is currently governing Iran following the Islamic Revolution of 1979. However, the only justification for such a system are offered on theological grounds, i.e. through reference to Quranic text, not through philosophical ones. And even these justifications are in dispute, as many other Islamic traditions, as we will see, favor different systems of theocratic government. Aside from the perhaps obvious concern with the practicality of instituting such a system globally, given the wide range of political views throughout the world, there are a number of reasons that one might be concerned with such a view. First, there does seem to be real disagreement about what is right and wrong, what laws should and should not be passed in the world. Even within the same sect of Christianity, there are huge disagreements about laws. For example, American Catholic bishops vehemently disagree with the Pope about whether they should be able to refuse the Eucharist to liberal politicians, let alone between sects of a religion, which have often fought huge wars, or between religions themselves. So this idea that everyone would line up behind a single set of rules seems unlikely at best. Second, the idea that Christianity is in some way a natural state of the world is completely unsupported. The vast majority of all humans that have ever lived have been non-Christians, and Catholics make up less than a fifth of the world's population. So claiming this is a natural state seems nonsensical, when clearly everyone seems to disagree about these rules, and so imagining this utopia where everyone suddenly accepts a religion and completely agrees on all the rules seems quite unlikely, if not impossible. And perhaps not a place that anyone would want to live, where there's no amount of disagreement or ability to have a different understanding than someone else. Additionally, and more generally, one might be concerned that the theocracies that we do have, such as Iran, are far from the utopia imagined. If anything, the concentration of power leads to additional corruption, public dissent, and the inability of the populace to remove political leaders that prove ineffective or fail to answer the will of the people, as we can see in the popular protests following the death of Mahsa Amini. Religious doctrines are notoriously incapable of change in the face of new evidence or public dissatisfaction, which can create great harm when those doctrines and when those ideologies are provided with political power, because they then refuse to respond to the will of the people. Now, other philosophers argue for theocratic systems where power is divided between the state and the clergy, with each having specific but separate powers. Campenella accepted something like this, but argued that a single king-priest would be better. One proponent of such a view was Louis Gabriel Ambroise, Vicomte de Bonald. Bonald argued for absolute monarchy and a separate single religious leader, the Pope. According to Bonald, for humanity to achieve success, we must unite behind a single culture and tradition. Bonald argued that the state and the church should work together, and the state should be governed by the church in moral matters. He argued that such a system could be justified through a return to tradition, claiming that the only reason for modern disagreement was a divergence from such good tradition, and in the interests of preserving that tradition, he opposed the rights of women, a free press, and supported censorship and capital punishment. A similar viewpoint can be found in the subsect of Sunni Islam called Wahhabism, which is sometimes referred to as a Saudi version of Salafism. This movement originated by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, relied on a compact between the royal family of Saudi Arabia and the descendants of al-Wahhab, that the Wahhabis would give legitimacy to the Saudi monarchy, and the monarchy would promote and defend Wahhabism as the true version of Islam. In this way, Saudi Arabia formed a theocracy where power is divided and held independently by the state and the faith, and the royal family controlling matters of state, and the Wahhabis controlling matters of religion. Russian philosopher Vladimir Solovyov defended a similar position, which he called free theocracy, but argued for 3 foci of power instead of 2, that corresponded to the 3 parts of the Christian Holy Trinity. A single leader of the church corresponding to the Father, a single political ruler corresponding to the Son, and prophets corresponding to the Holy Spirit that would spontaneously appear amongst the population and would mediate disputes between the other 2. Solovyov envisioned that only once these conditions were arrived at could humanity realize the kingdom of God on earth. For Solovyov, the political ruler should be the Russian Tsar, and the religious ruler should be the Pope, though he did not argue for global Catholicism, but rather for a universal church that included Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox positions as well, but was still united under a single leader, the Pope. Solovyov became disillusioned with this vision as time went on, eventually arguing for more liberal and tolerant viewpoints, including allowing for the rights of religious and national minorities against persecution, something that's always been a challenge for theocracies to deal with. Now, while such formulas have had success in providing some level of oversight or counterbalancing force to an absolute ruler, they still fail to live up to their claimed utopian vision. Unchanging religious mores prevent even beneficent dictators from making popular social policy improvements for their people because they can't go against the ethical mandates of the church that are often outdated. And the need to retain state support means that religions often need to swallow hypocrisy about the unethical or heretical behavior of political leaders because they need to maintain their support to stay in power. Further, any such system often relies on the principle of the divine right to rule instead of the consent of the governed. In other words, that someone has a right to rule because they were anointed by a divine power. Beyond being philosophically unjustified, this can lead to a range of issues, such as a political incentive for states to engage in religious war to justify their own legitimacy, to the requirement to snuff out religious minorities that might undermine or not accept rulership based on a religion that they don't believe in. The power of classical liberalism is that it allows for diverse groups to live together in peace by justifying the authority of the state through the consent of the governed, and requiring the policy to be built on rational principles, something a theocracy can never achieve. Check out our video on liberalism for more. Now, John Calvin proposed a slightly stronger separation of church and state, but not by much. For Calvin, the state should not have any role in the affairs of the church, nor should the church have any role in the affairs of the state. However, the church has a moral duty to help legitimize and provide popular support for the state, and the state has a duty to support and incentivize the public to participate in the church, including by punishing blasphemy. In some ways, then, this is quite similar to the Wahhabism of Saudi Arabia, with mutually reinforcing institutions. However, Calvin argued for the legitimacy of the state to come from a democratic process, through the consent of the governed, not through a divine right to rule. For Calvin, magistrates had the right and responsibility to make rulings based on divine commandments, but people also needed to have democratic systems to oust leaders without harmful revolutions. This avoids some of the issues with the systems that have more ossified state power, but still faces a number of challenges in pluralistic states with multiple religions, where you have magistrates that are ruling over or making rulings over people who disagree with them about fundamental ideas of ethics, morality, and religion. There are a range of other versions of borderline theocracies, where religion has less influence on government but still plays some role. One of these is state religions, where a state adopts a particular religion as its official religion. This can take on various forms, ranging from actively forcing indoctrination of children in public schools to simply providing lip service to religion through certain public holidays or language in a constitution. Another instance of theocracy is the alternative of religious courts. In extreme cases, the only courts that are available are religious, where decisions are made not based on the state laws, but on the religious laws of a place. But more often, particularly for minority religious groups, people may be allowed to settle disputes in front of religious judges that are following religious law instead of state courts, for example, Sharia law, halakha law, etc., instead of the traditional state institutions. This is particularly prevalent for small religious minorities who may have different rules for things like inheritance, marriage, divorce, etc., and they may be able to have those cases heard through religious courts, though such courts often lead to the circumvention of constitutional protections for human rights, particularly for women, especially when it comes to things like inheritance and marriage. Even when there is no formal acknowledgement of religion by the state, often religious groups attempt to use the state as a way to impose their beliefs on others, through co-opting particular political parties and using religious services to promote a particular political agenda. We see this in the United States with the growing influence of the quote-unquote religious right over the Republican Party, which has led some Republican politicians to go so far as to champion replacing a democratic state with a theocratic one. This is often a challenge faced by democracies, where authoritarians of various stripes, theocrats, fascists, dictators, etc., gain power through democratic means initially, and then dismantle those very democratic systems from the inside that gave them that power, ensuring they maintain their power. It's also interesting to note that some versions of theocracy are explicitly nationalist, in the sense that they're focused only on the rulership of a given community of people who already believe in that religion, while others, often Christian perspectives listed here, though some Muslim ones as well, are more universalist, focused on a global government or religion where all people are required to submit to that particular religion. While nationalists are asking, what is the best system of government for my people, or this group of people that is in this place, that most of them are my people, maybe some of them aren't, while universalists are asking, what's the best system for everyone in the globe, and how can we impose our viewpoint of religion on everyone else? This has interesting connections to views of nationalism and cosmopolitanism. Once again, for more on these, check out our series on nationalism. Beyond the specific objections to specific types of theocracy, there are a range of objections to the idea of theocracy in general. Some of these come from theists themselves, such as Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who argues against theocracy as an adulteration of the kingship of God. For Buber, God is king, and anyone claiming a religious right to rule is denying God's kingship, and in some way that we should acknowledge that only God should be king, and that trying to legislate particular religious rules in some way adulterates or breaks that bond. Others object from the standpoint of philosophical liberalism, arguing that governments must treat all people the same and that it's immoral and unjust to discriminate on some based on their religion. Others, such as cosmopolitanists, might argue that no one culture or community should have the right to rule over others, nor that people should be forced into a culture or a religion that they were born into. Rather, that people should be able to pick and choose from certain traditions as they see fit, as for what works best for them. Those who support democracy might argue that theocracy in any form doesn't give the people sufficient ability to change their leadership, nor does it vest the right to rule in the consent of the governed. Philosophical Republicans might argue against that theocracy concentrates power too much in the hands of just the clergy and doesn't allow for everyone to be part of their own government, nor does it allow for separate institutions to counterbalance the institution of the church. For the rest of this series, we're going to cover specific instances that are often called theocracy. Some fit into these formal definitions of theocracy, while others might be classified as somewhere in between theocracy and communitarian nationalism. So like I said, don't take this as an assertion that any one of these positions is an extreme theocracy, but rather that they are at least theocracy adjacent, perhaps fitting into one of the categories listed here of religious influence over government, state religion, etc. We'll start with 4, but we may add more as time goes on. So first off, we're going to be taking a look at what is Zionism. Then we'll take a look at what is Islamism. Then we will take a look at what is Hindutva. And finally, we will take a look at what is Christian nationalism. What do you think? Is theocracy a justified form of government? Are there particular types of theocracy that are more justified than others? How can theocracies address the fact that in an increasingly interconnected world, there will always be religious minorities living in their borders who are being governed by a religion they disagree with? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe if you like this video and want to see more and want to make sure you catch the rest of this series. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.